Hey, and welcome back to another Twinmotion video. In this video, we're looking at applying materials to objects, not looking at specifically how to make materials or anything like that, but just applying materials to different models. And I have 3 different models in front of me, each with different properties, even though they are the same model and look the same. We'll get into that in just a second, but I do want to say first, if at any point in this video you happen to learn something or you just like anything about it, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out so much. Also, please consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That always helps me out so much. So what are we looking at here? We are looking at 3 different canopies, but in this video we're looking at specifically applying materials to objects in Twinmotion. And you'll start to see the differences in when we start to actually apply some of these materials, but let me give you an idea of what we've got here. We've got 3 different canopies. The first one is imported directly from the direct link in Revit, and I'll expand this here so we can see it. I can select each individual object. I'm going to actually go back to Revit so we can see what this looks like out of Revit. So here's my canopy in Revit. I'm going to go to my settings in the Twinmotion tab, and you can see clearly I have set this to be no merge, and no merge simply means every single object that's here is going to be its own object. I'm going to have every opportunity to apply a specific material to every single object. Perfect. That's exactly what we want. So getting back into Twinmotion, clearly you can see every single object is selectable. I have every single object here in my containers. Everything. There's my first object. My second object, which I've imported as an FBX, I brought this in using by materials. And if you go to import, you can see in the options I've collapsed by material. You can keep the hierarchy, collapse by material, or collapse all. This second one I have collapsed by material, and clearly you could see the materials because I've got metal rod and canopy wood as 2 different objects there, each with their own separate material. So there's the metal rod, and then there's the canopy wood, which is everything else. So that's the second form of the canopy import. And then finally, the third is literally just the canopy itself. It is the canopy. And I've brought that in using collapse all. And that just means every single thing, every single object, every single group, everything in that model is simply one object. Okay? So let's start applying materials to these objects. And I'm first going to go to a wood material because, that's wood canopy. I've got these metal rods running through them. So let's go to our materials. And let's go to wood. And we can start to pick really any wood. But, I don't want something that has a floor or slats built into it. I want just kind of a solid wood look. And you'll find some of these around here. And this looks pretty good. It's just this basic chestnut. You can clearly see there's no slats or anything. It's kind of one continuous panel look. And that's kind of what we want because we've got individual pieces of wood, but at the same time, we don't want seams or anything like that. We just want it to look like wood. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this, and I can drag this. I'm going to drag it onto this third object over here, and we can see what happened. Well, I'm going to go in and edit this material, and we're going to have to see what this looks like. So it's applied everywhere, and the main thing that it's nice to know is that this material is brought in everywhere in this object that has this material still. Even though it's applied everywhere, this is one object, it's only applying this material where this material is applied. So at least it's smart enough, and that's nice. So really, it's kind of all based on material. So let's go here. So now I edit this material. We want to look at the scale a bit because it's not quite right. We want to change this a bit. So let's go ahead and change this to 5 and see what this looks like. You can clearly see that start to look pretty good. It looks like actual wood. So I'm going to be okay with that. Now, here's the big red flag. And the thing to be aware of is that now we've got all this wood applied with this material everywhere I have wood in this model. And that makes sense. But the fact that I've got these columns here, I don't want the wood to actually run this direction. Okay, and that's, it makes sense. You don't want the wood grain to run horizontally if you've got a vertical column. It just kind of makes sense. So I'm going to leave this here for now, and we're going to move on to the second material, or the second model here, where we have it's separated by material. And again, it's going to act basically the same way as before. It's because of the import. As soon as I apply that material, and again, I've changed that scale, it's applied everywhere, and I've got that wood slat running horizontally on the column, and I don't necessarily want that. And finally, I'm going to do the exact same thing with the third, so we can see that this wood is showing up everywhere. Get this wood, place it there, and now everything looks the same. That's great. That's really what we have to start with when it comes to applying materials in Twinmotion. Now, something I do want to point out to you is this is very important. If you hover over here, you can see this says replace material, and that's great. It says replace material, and I don't necessarily want to replace the material, but by replacing material, it's just applying the material that I drag from the material onto the object. That makes sense. Now, if I select this and choose apply to object, I have a different option, and it's just one single circle as opposed to multiple circles. And the idea here is that I can actually duplicate this wood, and because this wood is, I want to keep the scale and everything, I want to address the column. I want to address the column itself because I don't want this grain running horizontally. I want this running vertically. So this will have to be a separate material. Remember, that has to be a separate material, which is why I've duplicated it. But now I want to go into the scale and change this from a 0-degree rotation to 90. Okay, great. You can clearly see over here that this looks different. I've got the difference in materials because I've changed that rotation from 90 degrees to, from 0 degrees to 90 degrees there. We can see the difference right there. So that looks good. But what do I want to do now? I want to apply this material to my columns. Now, if I were to replace object before, and I drag this vertical over to the columns, now you can see I've got that vertical grain running on all of these horizontal wood slats as well. And I don't want that. We just went through this process. So I'm going to put the horizontal back. And once I do that, I'm now going to change to apply to object and then drag my vertically rotated wood, which is the same wood, to my column. And we can look at it here, and that is very nice. I can actually see that it is running vertically like we want it to, and the horizontal wood slats did not change at all. That's great. So let's come back over here and apply this. And again, this model is applied by materials. So now I'm going to do the same thing, apply to object, and take this material and apply it to the column. That's perfect. That's exactly what I want. And if we look at this other column, it actually worked with both columns, again, because this is collapsed by material. And finally, the third, I'm guessing I'll get the same outcome because I can take this wood and apply this vertically there, and it will not affect the other pieces of wood. That's great. Now finally, let's look at the third model. Again, this model is completely collapsed. It's one single object. I've got replace object on, and I've got my 90 degrees, and I want to put this on the column. So as soon as I do that, you can see that, yes, I've got it running vertically on my column, but the problem is I've also got it running vertically on my horizontal slats. So what is this telling us? Well, that says I cannot import a model as a single object and expect to have different options when it comes to materials by object. It just makes sense. If it's one object, it's one object. And this because it came in as one object and not by material. Now, while these may look the same, as I can select the metal rods here and I can select the metal rods there, in a sense, I can't select the metal rods. It's one object. But when it comes to materials, it's still going to apply by material. Except one whole material is is one object. So applying this single material to that object that is collapsed in of itself and just one object is going to apply that everywhere. And which is why, looking at all of this, it's clearly easy to see why I'd want to go import one way versus another. Like if you can avoid importing everything as one object, please do it. You can collapse by material if you want to organize by material. I find that it's a lot easier, and I have even more options. Every single object is its own object, because honestly, if I wanted to do, I could duplicate this horizontal wood, and I can maybe change the color a bit. I can lighten it up, and I can start to apply this to individual slats. This looks good. Having this ability to do that is awesome. It's really something that you might want to do. And now, yes, I can do basically the similar thing over here in that I can do this, but at the same time, you'll notice because it's collapsed by material, as soon as I apply this, I have no choice. It's just overriding the entire material, and that's too bad. That is really too bad, and that's just the way it works. So I would highly recommend using this third tactic in looking at applying materials. Really, the thing is, you have to think about how you want the project to work and how you want everything to look in Twinmotion. You want to have the ability to change the direction of the grain, for example, of wood in the project. Maybe you have the same type of wood. Well, then you're going to have to import by no collapse. You're going to have no merge, no nothing when it comes to importing things into Twinmotion. So this is a very powerful tool, applying to object versus replacing material. It's very powerful and allows you to actually get specific with the way you apply materials and changing the direction, color, absolutely anything that you want in Twinmotion. This really saved my life, and it makes materials look so much better. You don't have everything looking the exact same everywhere, and just it looks more real and it makes sense. So if I left anything out, if you have any questions, leave those in the comment section below. Also, if you learned something, please demolish that like button. It really helps me out so much. And if you would, please consider changing the phase of that subscribe button to existing. That also helps me out so much. And I thank all of you who have. I hope you all have a wonderful day. See you in the next video. Thanks for watching.